us, and I'd like to thank the co-hosts of the governments of Peru and Malawi, as well as the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime, Born Free, Wildlife Conservation Society, and the Wildlife Justice Commission for co-hosting and co-organizing the CITES event today. You will not be listening to speakers non-stop. We want you to engage. We want you to ask questions. So as you hear from speakers, think about questions you'd like to ask. Think about input, and also think about what you can do after the CITES event and after this meeting. We're all here together because we're all concerned about wildlife crime, about wildlife trafficking. We're going to have a lot of discussion over the next 4.5 days on compliance with CITES, non-compliance enforcement. But the purpose of the CITES event today is to ask and possibly answer the question, is the international legal framework against wildlife trafficking sufficient, or is more needed? Is there more that can be done from an intergovernmental multilateral perspective? No one is saying there isn't more that can be done from the national perspective, of course. But globally, intergovernmentally, are there gaps? And what can we do collectively to address those gaps? So I'll summarize at the end. I didn't introduce myself. I apologize. I'm Sue Lieberman, Vice President for International Policy with the Wildlife Conservation Society. And I have here at the table, and I'll introduce each when they speak as well, John Scanlon, Chair of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime, the distinguished permanent representative of Mali to the United Nations in Geneva, Ms. Bwanali Muss. Yeah, Malawi, didn't I say Malawi? What did I say? I meant to say Malawi, I apologize. Also the distinguished representative of Peru to the UN in Geneva, Ms. Romy Tincopa, thank you, as well as Miron, the International Relations Officer with the UN Commission. The EU Commission, sorry. We will have 2 video recordings, and then Lisa Hartevelt with the Director of External Relations, the Wildlife Justice Commission, and Mark Jones with Born Free Foundation. So I'm going to turn it over now to John Scanlon. Those of you standing, there are seats in the first row, second row, and third row, so please come forward and take a seat. I'll turn it over to my distinguished colleague, John Scanlon.
Great, thank you, Sue. Thanks for that lovely introduction. And good afternoon, all. Great to see so many of you here. Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us today and for sponsoring this event, and to all friends and colleagues. Now, I'm going to provide a brief overview to set the scene, and other speakers are going to dive into the issues in greater detail. But what I want to do to start with is just reflect for a little while where we've got to. And when I started as CITES Secretary General back in early 2010, I joined the Secretariat and I found that we were confronting a serious surge in wildlife trafficking, in particular as it affected the African elephant, the rhino, but many other species as well. But 3 things were apparent to me at that time. Firstly, the level of political and public interest and awareness of the issue was extraordinarily low. The relevant UN agencies and conventions were not engaging actively in addressing the issue. And I was Secretary General of the CITES that dealt with trade. We had scientific authorities, management authorities, and we found ourselves confronting transnational organised crime at scale. So how were we going to do this? So we actually reached out to the UN community, didn't get a lot of traction. We said, let's take it upon ourselves to act as a catalyst to ensure that there is greater awareness of this issue, there is greater response to it, there's greater resourcing. And we had great impact there. I'm not going to go through all of these, but we established the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime in 2010. We put all the relevant agencies together. We worked with states to get this issue within Rio +20 outcomes. We worked with states, including Gabon and Germany, to get the first UN General Assembly resolution on the issue. So a whole lot of traction to lift the profile of this issue. Now, did we do that because we thought that CITES was the right instrument to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking? No, we didn't. We did it because we realised CITES was not the right instrument. We needed to have the right players in the right place taking on these issues. So what is CITES and what isn't CITES? And this is an issue that's often put to us. Firstly, as you know, CITES is a trade-related convention. It uses trade-related measures to achieve a conservation objective. And you can see from this agenda there's a lot of work to be done in terms of non-detriment finding, understanding issues to do with captive breeding, etc. CITES applies to a subset of species, so it only applies to species listed in the appendices. It's around 40,000, or 0.5% of the world's 8 million species. And of CITES 40,000 species, 30,000 are orchids, and there are no fungi. That's another topic for another day. And CITES only requires parties to penalise breaches of the Convention. It does not oblige countries to criminalise breaches of the Convention. This is a great convention. We're all very fond of CITES, but it was never designed to combat wildlife crime, nor is it capable to combat wildlife crime. The fight against transnational organised crime rests within the UN. It rests with the UN agencies in Vienna, and the Commission and the conventions that rest in Vienna. So that's where we've been focusing our attention, but there is a gap in the international legal framework, because the UN Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime is a general instrument. There are 3 protocols on human trafficking, migrant smuggling and firearms smuggling, but nothing specifically on wildlife trafficking. So in June 2020, a group of us created the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime. It's hosted by ADN Capital Foundation. We've got colleagues from here, ADN Capital Foundation, with us today. And it had 2 objectives. And the one that's relevant for today is we want to advance discussions on a possible new international legal instrument to combat and prevent wildlife trafficking, to fill this gap. We're overseen by a small steering group. We have 33 organisations that are international champions. Everyone up here that's speaking today is a part of this initiative. So what's happened since then? Well, we've seen extraordinary expressions of support for a new international agreement to combat wildlife crime. Between May and February over the last year or so, we've seen the presidents of Costa Rica, Gabon, Angola and Malawi all publicly call for a new global agreement to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking, taking the form of an additional protocol under the UN Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime. We've seen the European Union commit itself to promoting the adoption of a protocol covering wildlife trafficking under the UNCTAD. And we've seen the American Bar Association adopt by consensus a resolution urging all UNCTAD parties to adopt such a protocol. But what's critically important, and what's happened most recently, is we've seen this issue embedded into the intergovernmental negotiating process. The UN Crime Commission was presented with a draft resolution by Angola, Peru and Kenya last year. It was sponsored by Malawi and 12 other countries. This was adopted by consensus. Now, there are a number of aspects of this resolution, but the bit that I want to draw your attention to is it invited member states to consider the possible benefits of an additional protocol under the UNCTAD to fill a gap in the international legal framework. Now, this was an historic resolution. This is the first time the UN had ever adopted a resolution calling for consideration of such an instrument. Now, the US Office of Drugs and Crime then conducted a process. They went out to all states, they presented these questions to states, and there are responses coming from 60 states and the European Union. And this is a preliminary analysis of the outcomes of that. We did it at the request of Angola and Gabon. Almost 50% of responding states were in support of a new protocol to combat and prevent wildlife trafficking. Around 28% were prepared to consider the idea, with some of them saying they supported the protocol, but they wanted it to expand its scope to take on board other crimes that affect the environment. 15% with no definite position, and a small percentage not in favour, and some suggesting an alternative approach. So quite extraordinary level of support for a new international instrument in this space. So what are the next steps? Well, there were some states that said that they didn't have time to respond to the call for responses by the UN Office of Drugs and Crime. So what's happened is they extended that time frame, and they've invited additional comments, and they will report, the UN Office of Drugs and Crime will report to the December session of the Crime Commission with an updated report and any additional responses received. And then states that are supportive of a protocol will take that into account and decide what sort of resolution they may choose to put to the next session of the Crime Commission in May next year. That could be to commence a negotiation or to continue on with discussions. That'll be a member of the states. So that's where we are. We've seen extraordinary progress. It's up for member states to decide if they want a new instrument. We see a lot of momentum building here. We're delighted that we have ambassadors from Peru and Malawi with us today, and Angola and others speaking, and we invite you all to join with us in this endeavour. Thanks.
To introduce the ambassador, the permanent representative of Malawi, with apologies, to the UN in Geneva, Ms. Bwanali Muss. Please, Ambassador, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sue Lieberman, for giving me the floor. And let me also seize this opportunity to extend my gratitude to all co-hosting organizations for the cooperation and tireless work towards this important side event. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Malawi has long been at the forefront of the efforts to combat wildlife trafficking. We have been fighting against those who illegally source wildlife products from our country, as well as those who use Malawi as a significant transit and distribution hub. It is a tireless fight, and our resolve remains unshaken. For this reason, in February 2022, His Excellency Dr. President of the Republic of Malawi, joined his brothers, the presidents of Angola, Costa Rica, and Gabon, in calling for a new global agreement on wildlife trafficking in the form of an additional protocol under the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime on top. At the 31st session of the UN Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, Malawi supported the adoption of Resolution 31/1 on strengthening the international legal framework for international cooperation to combat and prevent illicit trafficking in specimens of wild fauna and flora. The results of this first round of consultations were extremely encouraging. A report released by UN Nation Office on Drugs and Crimes contained the views of 60 member states, and the European Union confirmed that over half of the member states recognize the serious gaps in the existing international legal framework and are supportive of the additional protocol under the UNTOC covering wildlife and trafficking, as my colleague just mentioned. Additionally, according to analysis conducted by one of the co-hosts of this event, the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime, about 75% of responding states are either supportive of an additional protocol or are open to further discussions on its quotation. It is also worth noting that the strongest expression of support for a protocol came from African states, and you would agree with me that that's the right place such a support should come from. Our understanding is that the UNDOC Secretariat has continued to collect member states' views through 2023, and that it will share an updated report next month, December. The government of Malawi looks forward to learning more about the outcome of the additional consultation and would like to sincerely thank all member states that have contributed this far. Distinguished delegates, 3 protocols already exist under the UNTOC dealing with other serious forms of transnational and organized crimes such as human trafficking, firearm manufacturing and trafficking, and migrant smuggling. Wildlife trafficking, on the other hand, has sadly become one of the world's largest and most destructive criminal activities. We are firmly of the view that 4th protocol under the UNTOC is now evidently needed to prevent and combat these crimes. In negotiating such a protocol, and against many other matters, state parties could finally develop an adopted definition of wildlife trafficking, which would facilitate convergence of national approaches, thereby enhancing international cooperation. Such a protocol would also automatically trigger UNTOC general tools for cross-border cooperation without the need to make offenses punishable by 4 years imprisonment or more. This would serve to enhance the use of UNTOC's provision on international cooperation, mutual legal assistance, joint investigations, special investigative techniques such as controlled deliveries and law enforcement cooperation provisions in preventing and combating trafficking of wildlife. Distinguished delegates, as already highlighted, Convention on International that a new effort instrument should be negotiated to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking. We therefore call upon all of you, esteemed delegates, to join us in this bold endeavor aimed at protecting and safeguarding our planet's precious wildlife for the benefit of the people who rely upon the wildlife or their livelihoods and for our global environment. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I look forward to listening to a constructive discussion and let me thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador, in particular for your very inspirational words. Not only what the gaps are, but what could change with such an additional protocol. I now am honored to call on Her Excellency Romy Tincopa, the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Government of Peru to the UN here in Geneva. Please.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Lieberman and Mr. Scanlon and the organizer for convening this important event, which Peru is very proud to support alongside with Malawi and other organizations. Peru is one of the many countries that believe that we need to do more to stop wildlife trafficking. And we know more and more the trafficking is increasing and now has a presence in online platforms. As you are aware, the trafficking of wildlife is increasingly acknowledged as a special example of organized crime that takes advantage of gaps in national law, enforcement, and criminal justice systems. And we are already here when the ANTA was original negotiation in the late 90s, the trafficking of wild fauna and flora has not yet gained global international attention. Member states at that time negotiated strong instruments against transnational organized crime together with three protocols, but nothing about wildlife trafficking. Since then, this has grown to be one of the largest illicit transnational activities in the world, rapidly affecting the safety and well-being of human and wild animals. While the problem continues to escalate, our international legal framework have essentially stayed the same. Some stakeholders and others refer to the CITES, but however, we know CITES no criminalize breaches to the states. It does not oblige the state to criminalize breaches of the convention. It only applies to cross-border movement of wildlife and not, for example, to illegal harvesting or poaching. In this context, is that Peru has commitment to the importance of addressing illicit wildlife trafficking. And for example, in 2013, Peru submitted and negotiated a historical resolution adopted by ECOSOC on the recommendation to the United Nations Commission on Crime, Prevention and Criminal Justice, which for the first time calls for wildlife trafficking to be classified as a serious crime. In the same time, Peru promotes CCPCJ Resolution 28/3 on strengthening regional and international cooperation in crime prevention and criminal justice responses to wildlife trafficking. More recently, also my country, alongside Angola, Kenya, and and Malawi submit and negotiate the resolution 31/1 during the last year session of the CCPCD, and this what we have elaborated upon our answers to the questionnaire early this year. Also, we would like to underline that Peru are supported to implement and strengthen One Health approach in the current negotiation of the future instrument for pandemic prevention that is taking place in the WHO. Saying that, colleague, I would like to ask you to support in this manner of we wanted to take next steps to stop wildlife trafficking. I guess it can be like to have a protocol to prevent and combat illicit wildlife trafficking under the UNCLOS or negotiations on that. I guess in the answers that we have to the questionnaire, more of the countries are supporting to do that. And I guess it's time for this with the support of everyone. So, on behalf of Peru, I respectfully encourage you to support this in this critical moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Miron, the International Relations Officer with the European Commission. Please, thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you and congratulations to Government of Peru and Malawi, and also to Wildlife Crime and Bwanali Foundation, Wildlife Conservation Society, and Wildlife Justice Commission for organizing this important event. The topic is very important indeed and very actual because the scale of illegal wildlife trafficking is a concern for all of us. And this is, I think, also important for the EU to take its role as a source and transit and destination area for wildlife trafficking. And in this context, I would say that the international dimension of the wildlife trafficking is an aspect that is also emphasized, underlined in our programmatic documents. When I'm talking about programmatic documents, these are EU Commission documents such as the Wildlife Action Plan, which was adopted in November last year, and also the EU strategy for tackling organized crime. That was also adopted recently, actually, at the end of 2021. And it's in those programmatic documents that we, support is expressed for the work that is ongoing and reflections around the fourth protocol as to UNCLOS. And then I think that this is very important. It's a very important reflection also because indeed there may be a need to step up sanctioning system by introducing dissuasive sanctions for wildlife trafficking, to step up the action by criminalizing, so having a stronger legal framework which criminalizes actually illicit trafficking of wildlife. And so yeah, these are very, very important aspects. I'd like to say this was in the last, I had structured my presentation this week, but of course, as always, I have to be free in my speaking. This is something that we are also working on at EU level, first of all, with legislative proposals, which concern Environmental Crime Directive, which concern Anti-Money Laundering Directive, which concern the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So all these are these are working processes that are ongoing, And just to say, because people are not maybe familiar with how the EU functions, but the EU Commission, our role in this is to be a proponent, let's say. Yes, we have the initiative to propose legislation, and then it's the task of the co-legislators, which are the European Parliament and the Council, yes, to actually negotiate and define the final terms and the final provisions of those proposals, right? But just to come back to that, it is important for us, and for instance, we do have an environmental crime directive in place already, which recognizes that wildlife trafficking is a criminal offense. Also, I think, let's say implicitly, the current form of the directive that we have in place on anti-money laundering also makes the link between wildlife trafficking and predicate offenses. So wildlife trafficking becomes a predicate offense. And what is now ongoing, just to show a little bit of what's ongoing inside the EU, in the environmental crime directive proposal, we want to strengthen the sanctions. We want to strengthen provisions that address legal persons as well. We want to introduce provisions that strengthen the investigation tools. And let's see if this will be accepted by the co-legislators, but we also want to introduce provisions on whistleblowers, and I think this is very important because this also sends to the important fundamental work that the NGOs carry out on the field, yes, in this respect. So that's about what I could say. And also, what is interesting is that at the Council of Europe level, there are also there is a pending work on that, because at the end of 2022, a committee of experts was mandated to work and to produce a draft which criminalizes protection of environment through criminal law. This is the mandate. And so we are going to really closely follow, of course, also all those developments. Those are larger. They don't only concern wildlife trafficking, they concern also other environmental crimes, such as waste, shipment of waste, illegal shipment of waste, of course, etc. But these are very important developments to keep in mind, at least for us at our level. Also in terms of scope and how to define a criminal offense, etc. So that's, I'm sorry I didn't keep up to my presentation. That's about all in a nutshell. Maybe I would just say that, I would like to also say that it is important, of course, to have a very strong legal framework in place with very, to have a criminal offense defined and to have strong sanctions. But also what is important is implementation afterwards, right? And this is also a fundamental point, I would say, to give more importance to transnational cooperation, because this is the only way to dismantle organized crime networks, which very often extend across borders. That you have, it's important to provide for asset recovery and confiscation and any other dissuasive instrument to dismantle such businesses. And so these are very important context. And also finally to say for the very congratulations for the report, which compiles, I would say, responses from different parties, yes, by UNOC. We are also looking forward to the updated version in December. And I would say that, it offers a very good mapping, of what is there, and also maybe current, let's say, or envisaged developments, such as, for instance, the EU has the EU Commission, we did refer to the pending legislative developments. And that's about all. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to participate in the CITES Standing Committee albeit virtually. And thank you also to End Wildlife Crime, Born Free Foundation, Wildlife Conservation Society, and Wildlife Justice Commission for convening this important session. And thank you also to my fellow panelists for their presentations. My name is Pat Prugh. I am a senior attorney advisor with the Office of the Legal Advisor, Law Enforcement and Intelligence with the U.S. State Department. For more than 20 years, I have participated on delegations of the United States to multilateral fora to shape anti-crime policy. And the principal venues that I've been participating in, I think, are probably well familiar to you. The first is the Conference of Parties to the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, known as the UNTOC. The Conference of States Parties to the UN Convention Against Corruption, which is the UNCAC, and also participating in the Commission, the United Nations Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, known as the CCPCJ. 2 years ago at the CCPCJ, we passed a resolution, 31/1, in which we asked UNODC to gather information from participating states on ways to more effectively implement wildlife trafficking. We're still waiting for the results, but while we wait, we thought we would take this opportunity to share with you the U.S. views on whether or not we should have a protocol to the UNTOC to more effectively counter wildlife trafficking. And the United States, we're not there yet. We do not embrace this position, and our primary reason for not being persuaded that a protocol is necessary right now is that we think the Mother Convention, the UNTOC, truly has some very important tools that states could use that they're not yet using to more effectively implement measures to counter wildlife trafficking. We look at a protocol as a supplement to the UNTOC, and a protocol is really only necessary where the crime itself is one that needs definition. So let's take the example of the Trafficking in Persons Protocol. Before that protocol was adopted, there was not a common understanding of what actually was included in the offenses of trafficking against person. So the protocol served to lay out this very complex, lengthy, and multifaceted series of activities that constitute the crime. When we look at wildlife trafficking, while we see that there are a variety of offenses, we don't see that there's great misunderstanding about what those offenses might be. What we see instead is that the tools that are available through the UNTOC are not being used. So what tools am I talking about? Well, the first one is to make sure that the criminal offenses related to wildlife trafficking are considered serious offenses. Serious offenses are defined in the UNTOC, and they include offenses where the maximum punishment is 4 years. That means an individual must be punished to at least a possibility of 4 years in order for that to be considered a serious offense. States should look at their legislation if they have, for example, a poaching offense or an offense of selling wildlife in an open market as only a year or 2 years, then those offenses won't fall under the UNTOC, and the tools of the UNTOC won't be available. So a very important way to be more effective is to ensure that the minimum punishment that a person could be adjudged is 4 years. The second thing that states can do is make sure that their wildlife trafficking offenses are what we call predicate offenses for money laundering. Money laundering and transnational organized crime go hand in hand. One of the more difficult things for wildlife trafficking, as in any trafficking organization, to do is to get rid of the proceeds of crime. That is their Achilles heel. So if you can find where they are putting their money and that's the money laundering offense, then you can more effectively fight crime. But in order to be able to use that money laundering offense, we have to be able to find that the predicate offense was one that triggers money laundering. So go back and look at your domestic legislation and make sure that your wildlife offenses are predicate offenses to money laundering. There is an additional measure you could do. You won't find it in the UNTAC or the UNCAC, but we have encouraged member states to both UNTAC and UNCAC, and also at the CCPCJ, we have suggested that states might look at Lacey-like measures. Lacey is a U.S. statute that we have, which has a unique feature that allows us to use the laws of a foreign country when their protected species are illicitly imported into the United States. So we may not have a domestic law that protects that species. It may be something unique to that foreign country, but we can still use their legislation, that foreign government's legislation, as a basis for finding the import violated the U.S. law. So those are just some measures that could be taken well before we get to the point of looking at a new protocol. So thank you very much again for this opportunity to explain the U.S. position. Thank you, and good luck to the CITES Standing Committee. Thank you.
Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to join today's side event to discuss a matter of great importance to the government of Angola, the urgent need to strengthen the international legal framework to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking. I would like to most sincerely thank the government of Malawi and Peru for generously inviting me to join today's discussion, as well as the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime and all other co-organizers. Honorable delegates, in September 2021, Angola's President, Honorable Excellency João Lourenço, publicly called for the adoption of a new global agreement against wildlife trafficking, taking the form of additional protocol under the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. In his statement, the President warned that as we continue to watch Angola's wildlife disappear, powerful criminal forces are profiting from large sums of money, preventing vital taxes and fiscal revenue from reaching rightful government sources and permanently harming our country's distinctive tourism assets. In May 2022, less than a year after President Lourenço's statements, Angola, Kenya, and Peru drafted and submitted a resolution to the UN Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, inviting member states to express their views on the potential of a new global agreement to tackle wildlife trafficking. This historic resolution was adopted by the Commission by consensus and co-sponsored by 13 other member states. In May this year, I was delighted to learn that a clear majority of member states that submitted their views were either in favor of additional UNTOC protocol on preventing and combating wildlife trafficking, or said that they are open to having this discussion. In this, an extremely encouraging result for Angola. We are biodiversity-rich, source country, and at the front line of this fight, and it is wonderful to see the member states from across every region and expressing their willingness to work with us in advancing this critical and important effort, and we thank you. For Angola, the path forward is clear. CITES plays an essential role in regulating the sustainable legal trade in listed species. It still has a lot of work ahead to achieve this objective. A new legal instrument will bring wildlife crimes under the umbrella of the International Criminal Law Framework and serve to provide agreed definitions and significantly strengthen the cooperation, coordination, and communication among states to both prevent and combat wildlife trafficking. Different issues need to be tackled using the right tools. CITES is a trade instrument. We now need a crime instrument, an instrument designed to deal with transnational and often organized wildlife crime. We are firmly of the view that the best solution is to adopt of an additional protocol to UNTOC, but we are open to discussions and other options. The UNOTC itself has a role to play in preventing and combating wildlife trafficking, but there is a reason why we negotiate and adopt the 3 existing protocols. The UNTOC is a general instrument that most serious forms of transnational organized crime, like wildlife trafficking, need to be tackled through target instruments with agreed definitions and commitments on cooperation, coordination, and communication from stages right across the illegal supply chain. Distinguished delegates, Angola looks forward to continue to work with colleagues in this room and outside of this room. We continue to build momentum towards creating the best possible international legal framework to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking for the benefit of our people, our clients.
It's an honor to be here today on behalf of the Wildlife Justice Commission, and I'd like to start off also by saying that the Wildlife Justice Commission is proud to be one of the founding champions of the global initiative to end wildlife crime. At the Wildlife Justice Commission, our mission is to disrupt and help dismantle transnational criminal networks that traffic wildlife, timber, and fish. And because we focus on the most vulnerable species, CITES is an important instrument to our work. In our work, we found extensive evidence of transnational and organized criminal networks deeply entrenched in wildlife crime, but also the need to bring together trade, conservation, and organized crime frameworks to effectively tackle this type of crime. So, a 4th protocol to the United Nations Transnational Organized Crime Convention, the UNTOC, will provide several benefits to the effective combating of transnational wildlife trafficking, and I'd like to highlight 3 that relate to our work. Firstly, the 4th protocol will bring a focus on CITES. Now, this has been mentioned before. CITES is a trade convention law. In contrast, the UNTOC contains important provisions for the criminalization of organized crime activities, including for their prevention, investigation, as well as prosecution. Formalizing wildlife crime into the realm of the UNTOC would recognize it as a serious crime, and this would mean not only an increased awareness to the problem, but also the prioritization of wildlife trafficking at the strategic level, which would lead to more resources as well as broader mandates to address wildlife trafficking at national levels. Due to the transnational nature of wildlife crime, stronger international cooperation among law enforcement agencies is really essential. With the UNTOC, and this has been mentioned by one of my co-panelists, can really provide the legal basis to facilitate this type of international cooperation, for example, through its provisions on extradition and mutual legal assistance. The second benefit would be to increase the systemic use of law enforcement tools. And while calls to use the UNTOC to implement specialized investigative techniques, intelligence analysis, and financial investigations in wildlife crime cases, unfortunately, this is still the exception and not the norm. A 4th protocol to the UNTOC could automatically trigger the use of these important UNTOC provisions to tackle wildlife trafficking, providing for stronger mandates for governments and agencies across the globe. Specialized investigation techniques such as controlled deliveries and undercover surveillance are really essential to secure the arrest and successful prosecution of the more senior members of the organized criminal groups, and this could then in effect lead to greater disruption of the criminal networks. Intelligence analysis is really a force multiplier and can guide law enforcement agencies to focus limited resources to where they are most needed, as well as investigations to remain focused on the greatest criminal threats. Financial investigations are also essential not only to prevent criminals from benefiting from the proceeds of crime, but also to enable this much-needed shift in the current perception of wildlife trafficking as a low-risk, high-reward crime. And then lastly, and I'll mention this briefly because some of these gaps have already been mentioned, but another benefit of the 4th protocol would be to close legislation gaps in the trade. It has already been mentioned by Mr. Scanlon that CITES provides protection from international trade only for a small portion of the 8.7 million wild plants and animals that are out there. Another gap relates to the disparity in national protections. National protected species that do not benefit from any protection at the international level can, once they are smuggled out of their country of origin, be legally imported and traded to other states. And this undermines, obviously, the former's efforts to protect their endemic biodiversity. We also see that conversely, CITES species are sometimes not protected at the domestic level, meaning that they can only be protected once that they are exported. And then this disparity in national protections also leads to crime displacement, which is another big issue that we see in our work. When a country strengthens its law enforcement efforts against wildlife trafficking, criminal networks often displace their operations into more limited jurisdictions. A protocol criminalizing wildlife trafficking would thus additionally help harmonize criminal laws globally and make it risky for criminals to do business anywhere. So in conclusion, it is imperative to consider the profound impact of activities conducted by organized criminal networks on species survival. Addressing the organized crime driving wildlife trafficking is essential to prevent the extinction of entire species, and the fourth protocol in this regard must not be seen in isolation from the conservation goals of regulating the trade in wildlife, but rather as an instrument that can bridge crime and conservation for our incumbents like this. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Born Free is a co-founder and steering group member of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime. So it's a real honour to be invited to speak to you today alongside such a distinguished panel. With your indulgence, I'd like to add or re-emphasise one specific point and then finish with some general comments. First, I'd really like to just re-emphasise and expand a little upon the point made by our colleague from the US Department of State in her video presentation and by my colleague from the Wildlife Justice Commission. As we've heard, while CITES is hugely important, it only covers a small proportion of the wild animals and plants found in legal and illegal trade. According to the 2016 Wildlife Crime Report from the UNODC, millions of species that are not listed by CITES may be illegally harvested and traded internationally. Now, many national jurisdictions protect their indigenous species through their domestic legislation. However, species not covered by CITES are typically offered little protection once they're removed from their country of origin, since no international regulatory framework exists to regulate or monitor the trade. As a result, in most countries, enforcement authorities currently don't have a legal basis to seize illegally sourced species, which are solely protected in their country of origin, and those illegally sourced animals and plants can then be traded with relative impunity. As CITES continues to play a vital role in protecting internationally traded plant and animal species from overexploitation, an international agreement focused on preventing and combating illicit wildlife trafficking more generally would provide an opportunity to ensure that nationally protected non-CITES listed species are also afforded much needed protection within the international legal framework. Now, in addition, I think it's probably worth just stepping back and reflecting on the impacts of wildlife trafficking and why we believe it's so important to establish international mechanisms to address the issue. Wildlife trafficking is serious, organised and transnational. It contributes to the extinction risk facing countless species. Through its damaging effects on wildlife conservation, it negatively impacts on ecosystems and the ecosystem services they provide, including their ability to sequester carbon. The involvement of organised crime in wildlife trafficking and its links to other forms of serious crime such as corruption and money laundering undermine good governance and the rule of law, and by doing so pose a threat to national and regional stability and economic development. And wildlife trafficking exposes wild animals to considerable stress, which in turn increases the likelihood of zoonotic pathogen emergence, putting human health at risk with the combination of highly stressed wild animals and close contact between them and people, creating the conditions for human transmission. The UN General Assembly has now issued no less than 6 resolutions on the subject since 2015, most recently in August of this year. And in this year's resolution, among other things, the UNGA recognised the economic, social and environmental impacts of illicit trafficking in wildlife. It called once again on member states to make illicit trafficking in protected species of wild fauna and flora a serious and predicate crime. and it invited parties to the UN Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime to more effectively use the convention to address illicit trafficking in wildlife and to continue discussions on other possible international tools to combat wildlife trafficking. Tackling wildlife trafficking also forms a key element of the work towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Goal 15.7, taking urgent action to end poaching and trafficking of protected species, Goal 16.3 on promoting the rule of law, and Goal 16.4 on combating organised crime and illicit financial flows. Despite all this, there is still no universally accepted definition of the term wildlife trafficking, nor is there an international agreement to tackle it. Efforts to effectively prevent and combat this serious form of organised crime are fundamentally hampered by the lack of a common, global, legally binding framework, and domestic legislation is all too often drafted without the benefit of a common agreed definition or approach, which hampers cross-border cooperation. The close international cooperation required to tackle these transnational organised crimes is lacking, and penalties for perpetrators are inconsistent and all too often fail to reflect the serious nature and consequences of these criminal activities. So it's for these reasons that we see it as vital that the international community agrees a process to develop an appropriate and effective international agreement, with our preference being for a protocol under the UN Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime. Thank you very much.
Identify yourself when you do, and apologies, we were not able to arrange interpretation, so this is in English only. Please.
Thank you very much for the presenters. My question is aimed at John, and the presenters as well. I think there are so many legal instruments in place, and the biggest challenge is the implementation of those legal instruments. When you look at word trafficking, what comes to mind is possession crimes, and very often enforcement authorities and judicial officers have got a different understanding and interpretation of what means by trafficking or possession. Now we are coming up with a new instrument. Obviously, possession is at the center of it. I presume you are going to have a look at different national legislations and how do they provide for possession and trafficking. How do you intend to go around this implementation problem by introducing a new protocol? I guess my question is clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's have one or two other questions and then turn it over to panelists to ask. Anyone else wish to ask a question? Oh, come on. Everything's perfectly 100% clear. Please, sir. And then the WWF afterwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the panelists. I would like to raise a concern because one of the...
Identify yourself.
Oh, my name is Romy. I'm from the Forestry Administration, Cambodia, and I'm also chair of the Interagency Task Force for combating illegal wildlife and, plagues and all of that kind of thing. Let's say like Cambodia also integrate one of that is integrate the forest and wildlife crime as also the money laundering. It's all of that can be what we call go hand in hand in terms of investigation and prosecution. So one of the things that we also be conducted. My question is about the recent allegation. That's one of the examples that this is based on the kind of the group of the people that that they want to maximize the not a moral responsibility to the woman survival, but they want to have a benefit out of that by let's say one of that is the U.S. having arrest one of our colleagues when they go to the COP19. The concern is, the question is, how you have specified about the Conservation Act and Lassie Act. Madam from the State Department discussed about that, and also, all of that, and what they usually something that fake evidence, and also with no scientific kind of what we call a background. For example, they based on one of the research of the what we call one student, they do that, and they say the long-tailed macaque is going to extinct. And this is, they use that as an IUCN red list and as endangered. When they use all of that, how the law enforcement can be credible, in terms of this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. No, I don't think we can answer any questions here on any specific cases, and I would encourage you to meet with the delegation of the United States here at the meeting, but I don't think any of our panelists have any information on this specific case. Yes, Coleman, please.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you to the speakers and the organisers. I'm just wondering, is there any feedback or information from those who have experience of the other protocols, the protocol, the human trafficking protocol, and the firearms protocol, as to lessons that could be learned from them or how effective that they were? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody want to take the first question on the definition of wildlife trafficking? Please, go ahead, John.
Thanks, Pat. And I think what the speakers have made clear today, we don't actually have a common legal framework that we're working within. We don't have any agreed definitions. Countries have their own way of defining crime, their own way of defining what wildlife is included or excluded. Sometimes it's just protected species, sometimes it goes broader than that. What is being contemplated here is an agreement that will have a common set of definitions, and they will be applied domestically, which will help cross-border cooperation. And getting to the last question, in terms of the protocol on human trafficking, having an agreed definition on human trafficking has been shown to be highly beneficial to states in cooperating with one another in dealing with the cross-border aspects of these crimes. So the answer to Common is yes, there are good lessons to be learned. Protocols are useful when they're applied in the right way, and this one would be as well. But what is intended here, and it'll be up to states what they negotiate out, is to have a broad definition of wildlife, so all fauna and flora and fungi, which is often put under plants, but it is a separate kingdom, and also put some obligations on destination states. So some destination states, one of the speakers emphasised, for them to take measures to criminalise the import into their state of wildlife that's been taken illegally from a source state. So the wildlife's been taken from Switzerland and it's going into the United States. It is an offence in the United States having stolen it from Switzerland, as well as an offence in Switzerland. So it provides a common framework, and it provides an opportunity, and we've seen it with other protocols, to have cooperation on a scale that we don't see at the moment.
Other questions? I'm sorry, Mark, I couldn't see your hand way down there. Please go ahead.
That's okay. We're right at the end of a very long desk here. No, I just wanted to really add to what John's just said in terms of the opportunities to provide a framework which provides that consistency of definitions and enables a consistent approach which helps individual countries develop their own legislation and practices and their fulfilling their commitments to our international process is something that I've mentioned. And just in relation to the first question that we had, I think that our colleague from the Commission mentioned that there are some very interesting processes going on within, for instance, the EU and the Council of Europe and in some other jurisdictions, looking at the issue of wildlife crime often as a subset of broader environmental crime. So I think it would be important to look at those and to see the way that those are being developed, and there's some very interesting developments going on there, in order to help to inform what an international agreement, possibly another protocol under UNCTAD might look like. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the room? I may ask a question, but first, any other questions from the room? Don't see any hands up. One question I have before summarizing is, we've heard that about 3/4 of the governments who responded either support an additional protocol or very open to it. For those, only 5%, and I don't know of anything else with more than 3/4 of the world's governments agreeing right now. But that left approximately 5%. What is their opposition? Is anybody able to answer that? John?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. So 60 states responded, plus the European Union. There will be some other responses coming forward that will be reported back in December. But the 48% or so were supportive, and the other 28% were open to it, and some there were open to it, but on the basis they'd like to see the scope of the protocol expanded to take on other crimes that affect the environment. Some, as we heard from the US, take a slightly different approach. They were in the 3.8%, which they suggest exhaust the existing instrument first before we go down the path of the protocol. Those that objected, well, they said they're not in position to support at this stage. The reasoning was not 100% clear, to be quite honest, on the analysis in terms of what the rationale for that was, but they basically said at this stage they're not supportive of an additional protocol, but the reasoning was not totally clear from the written response, so we'd have to take that up. But that was around 5% of the responses.
Okay, thank you. Any other panelists want to comment on that? If I don't see any hands up, I'll summarize, which is impossible to do. Sorry.
Microphone, no, sorry.
Oh, I probably can hear me, but I'll use the microphone. You know, personally, I first worked on CITES, I won't say what year, but 33 years ago I started working for the US CITES Management Authority and then went to the Scientific Authority. And CITES was young then. And I was told, don't talk about crime. You know, it's talking about, you know, management and wildlife management and NDFs and all that, all very important. And certainly don't talk about corruption. And when you talk to the Justice Department, don't talk about that. And now what we're hearing is CITES has made tremendous strides in its 50-year history. But there are gaps. And when we look at wildlife crime, when we say wildlife crime, we're talking terrestrial, marine, freshwater, fauna, flora. Some governments are thinking just terrestrial animals, not thinking plants. Some governments are thinking, wait, does that include timber trafficking? Does that include high seas fisheries and crime on the high seas? So there is a necessity, as we've heard, to look from a perspective of crime, and particularly organized crime. And what we're also hearing is that wildlife crime is not a victimless crime. I used to hear that 20, 30 years ago, and thankfully I don't hear it anymore. Yes, it is harming wildlife and wildlife populations and ecosystems, but it's also harming local communities. And it's also undermining sustainable development and undermining governance. And when you talk about organized crime of other crimes other than wildlife, governments understand, yes, we need to work together to combat trafficking in persons and having a protocol on trafficking in weapons. So now it's really time to look at wildlife and wildlife writ large, meaning flora, fauna, and fungi, and looking at that from the perspective of organized crime. This isn't something new. It's not as though wildlife crime started last year, but we are seeing an increased engagement of organized crime. We've seen excellent summaries here, which I won't repeat, of the benefits of an additional protocol. The US isn't there yet, but we're hopeful the US will get there. The US is right, there's a lot that can be done with national legislation. And a lot of governments, our organization, Wildlife Conservation Society, and others, working with governments at the national level to improve legislation, such as the Lacey Act that the US has. If you violate the laws of a country other than the US and import that wildlife into the US, it is a felony under US law, even if it's not CITES, even if it's not endangered. And we're hoping to work with other governments on similar legislation. But there's a real space for intergovernmental, transnational cooperation. We've heard the benefits in helping governments impose greater sentencing, but also in crime prevention. When we look at wildlife crime, it's not only about enforcement and putting more people in jail, it's about preventing the crimes in the first place. And we need to use crime science And the additional protocol under UNTOC magically will not solve the problem, but it will increase the attention on the issue and the prioritization of combating organized crime, organized wildlife crime. So I encourage all of you, in summary, to those of you with governments, please talk to other governments, other parties, organizations represented here and in the room on how we can all collaborate together to move forward on this additional protocol under UNTOC. That doesn't mean that's all that needs to happen and we get an additional protocol, we've solved the problem, any more than human trafficking and weapons trafficking has ended because there's a protocol. But there's more collaboration, and the prioritization of those crimes by national governments has increased. And when UNTOC meets, they have separate discussions on how those protocols are being implemented. We need that as well for wildlife crime. Thank you very much for joining us, for the organizers, and particularly for the speakers and the support of governments for this ambitious but critically important effort. Thank you very much.